Yeah. I always wonder like how much I should talk. It was
And when it's going for there, yep.
interviews.
But I think people are used to on stream now that unless if they're going straight from Zoom instead of like through OBS, they always know like, well, then there's always the expected beginning patter of I don't know if we're online or not.
Yeah, I know because I Twitch popped up and it said we weren't live, but now I think it says that we are live, but it's loading. So sorry, Twitch first. If you're watching somewhere else like Facebook or whatever, please go ahead and join us on Twitch so you can interact with us. It's twitch.tv/nopantsimprov, and throw in the chat any questions you have for John because we want to throw all those hard-hitting questions at him. Hey, John, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah.
I've just realized that I should put that up there as well. I love that you're doing this. I've been watching them, and it's always great to hear the backstory of troop mates. And so, yeah, particularly because there's so many new folks in this troop to me.
Yeah, and then people will say things that will stick with me for a long time after. Like, I was telling you, I think some of the best parts of Mike's interview didn't even make the interview. They were like before and after, but he was talking about, we've had a couple people leave No Pants because just 2020 is hard and crazy. And he was saying how like the reasons that they leave are the reasons that he doubles down because improv makes him happy. And that just like stuck in my brain since last week. So thanks for that nugget of joy, Mike, because I loved that. And I agree.
I'm definitely on Team Mike in that regards. The way when people sort of describe like, oh, these are terrible things, like that's right. That's why I need more of that. So
yeah, improv is like it. I think other than just being sad that people have left, like a few people have left, it's been extra sad just to be like, oh, improv is not bringing them that kind of joy, because it's definitely bringing me that kind of joy.
Yeah, and I often think that I get when folks are more skeptical about watching improv online. I think that we're still, shows can be rough. Watching improv not online can be rough at times on that, because most people on stage are definitely early and in the process of learning for it. But Zoom, like it takes away a lot. But whereas I think like a Zoom performance, unless you figure out something that really fits the format, is maybe 20% of online, just to throw random numbers at it. Performing it still feels much more like 70%, 80%. Like it scratches a lot of the same itch. I miss the audience. I didn't realize fully how much the audience played a role and how they did, but the actual art of being a character, making a scene with someone, like that sense of like looking at each other and like that twinkle in the eye, like, okay, we've got this fun thing, let's play with it. Like that still happens on Zoom.
Yeah, totally. Like so much of what I love about improv I can still do, but then there are things that I miss, like you kind of learn these things, or at least in second series they teach you these things, so like the audience goes nuts for these things, and like callbacks and whatever. And so now I do them and I'm like, I hope they're laughing out there, because you want that like instant gratification of someone being like, oh, you're awesome.
It's perpetually in that, like every now in a show, like normally it's not like I've got this funny thing, audience go now, because usually I think once you've been improvising a while, when you feel yourself with this urge, like I've got that funny thing, like it also has a red flag that goes over your head. Like, no, like if you've had this thought, the audience had this like yesterday, and it's not going to seem novel. It's going to seem hack, but still every now and then it's like, no, like you just know, like this is going to happen. It gets so ingrained that like I've made this kind of move before. Your body just knows I do this, the audience responds. And then in a show, every now and then, like that would happen and there wouldn't be an audience response. It'd be like, and I'd have this moment of like thinking, is the audience broken? Which is like nuts, but it's just somehow like, it feels like the physics, sometimes you're in a show and it feels like the physics of comedy has changed on you on that. And then trying then like not getting in your head over it, but it can still be surprising on it. But now online, it has that feel all the time, right? Because without the audience feedback on it, it's like having a broken audience. Not that the audience is ever broken, but it felt that way for a bit.
Yeah, they're in different places. So you do like so much. You teach, you do No Pants, you have other shows that you do. You've been doing it for a long time. And before we get into all of that history stuff, there was a question that I wanted to ask you with it. We were talking about right before. We're like, what are John's tips for excellent Zoom prov? Like what makes improv over Zoom interesting?
I don't think, so it's still, doing good improv is still really important. I think that's part of it. That I think it puts more emphasis on doing good improv around character work. I think that can really read very well. We lose a lot of physicality and scenic moves that we can make through physics, or through moving and whatnot. But character can still read. In fact, even more so because we're closer on the screen. So doing that and making emotional choices that are read, I think that's, you even notice it more subtly in Zoom in nice ways for that. So I think that's part of what makes for good Zoom prov. The other thing that I think makes for good Zoom prov is general, is not having more than 2 to 3 people in the scene. Like I already think in general, my unhappy spidey senses go off when there's more than 3 of us in a scene. Like I'll do Herald group games, like we can go there, but in general, it's very difficult to do well. And then to do well, it's less fun because you're having to put way more mental energy into just sort of doing traffic cop of the scene, what the scene needs, whether or not I need to be quiet now, and just focus sharing to me, I'm good at, but it's work. It just feels like it's not the fun of improv in that for it. But it's even more so in Zoom when you have a ton of people on the screen. If they're all being quiet in the background and they're just physical, that can work. But trying to have a 6 or 7 person in a mono scene where there's no entrances and exits, they're there all the time, and you're trying to share focus, and Zoom handles audio interruptions poorly, and it's harder to get nonverbal cues to make sure you don't interrupt. It's a train wreck. So I think a lot of shows that I've seen, if there was just a rule of like, hey, no more than 2 or 3 people in a scene for any time, they would benefit a great deal.
Yeah, totally. I love that. And yeah, the only way I want a scene with that many people in it is like an onion peel. Do you know what an onion peel is?
Is this where it goes up and down with the number of folks?
Yeah. So it's like you see that scene for, you got 6 people or 8 people on stage for like 30 seconds. And it's like they do something and then the fun is in like remembering what it was on the way. I've done like 12-person onion peels, like remembering what it was on the way back down. You're like, all of a sudden, especially if it's great to be the first person. Because if you're somewhere between like 2 and 4 or 5, like all of those little scenes, you're like, do I leave now? Was this my last one?
Right. Much more entrance next. Yeah.
So you told me that when you started improv, you saw a terrible show and that drew you in, and I must have.
So I think a lot of people, their origin story on improv is that they saw a great show and they were like, oh my God, that was magical. I want to be able to do that. And I went to go see an improv show at, it was Disney. I grew up in Central Florida, and Disney World. I was back from a vacation from college, and Disney World was running. They had something place called Pleasure Island, which was there's like a bunch of nightclubs. It was kind of this odd thing to have drinking on Disney property or whatnot. And they had a comedy club. And so I went with friends to go see it. And it roughly ended up being, it was an improv show. And it was mainly short form with the leaning into musical improv games in particular for it. But there were a couple of things that were just awkward. And I even remember someone in the audience yelled out at one point, awkward. And that got a huge laugh because it was awkward. But it also, it made him think, I remember thinking like, well, I mean, I think I could probably do that. Like at least, so rather than seeing something that makes it look like magic, like they're going like, oh, like that looks like it could be fun. And sometimes it can go well. It's not every scene that they did was bad. That to me, that sort of was a very empowering, like that looks like fun and it looks doable.
Doable. That was the word that came to mind for me. It was like they made it look doable. That's awesome. Yeah. I love that. And one of the things I really love, or that touched me a lot, was your story about getting hooked on improv.
So improv, part of it was that improv was scratching sort of all the itches I found that I liked beforehand for it. But then the moment in improv classes where I was like, oh, like it went from like, oh, this is a fun new hobby, or this to like, oh, I need this and I deeply love it, was my first level. And I remember we played a game, Yes, Let's, which I think is a pretty common game. Someone says, hey, everybody, let's, and they might say like, go bowling. And everyone yells, yes, let's. And now you're all bowling. And ideally you try to do it so that now it's the teacher and me, not you're all bowling out, but you actually make a whole stage picture of bowling together. But the point is everyone says, yes, let's. And so after like the second or third, yes, let's, I started getting teary-eyed, and I realized it was because when I was working in academia, which is the height of everyone will find a reason to find a problem in anything. Like that's a lot of graduate education, and it trickles up to then being faculty on it, to just being able to nitpick everything is somehow that's the biggest contribution that you make. And so to actually just say something and everyone like, yes, let's, well, I hadn't realized how totally counter that was to what I was experiencing and how good it felt. So, yeah.
Yeah. This is out of left field, but that reminds me. Have you ever watched The Good Place?
Yes.
Did you watch season 3?
I did, but I watched them all, but I'm fuzzy on like where things came into it.
So in my opinion, season 3 is a genius season of television, because what it ends up being about through the arc of the season is like they find out nobody's actually getting into the good place because there's so many unintended consequences for our actions. And like throughout the scene, he'll be like, somebody will be like trying to decide what kind of muffin to buy, and it's like, blueberries are problematic because of this, and oats are problematic because of that, and like if you use a muffin container that's this way, and I didn't realize until I saw that, like, how much of life is that, it's like, like sometimes some people will come over to your house and they're like, I don't know, like judging the way you throw things away or like whatever it is, and it was just like for someone to see that and then tease it out and then call it out, like really touched me. And I think that it's a similar thing of just like everything is potentially so problematic. And in life today, a lot of it is like being woke. It's like a woke off of like, I'm more problematic than you. And I don't mean to say let's throw out the baby with the bathwater, but at some point, like sanity and mental health become important, and I can't like be checking everything I do all the time. Like sometimes I just need to be in the flow of life.
Yeah, and I definitely I resonates. I've always loved the phrase that the perfect is the enemy of the good, which definitely came from the conflict resolution work that I did. That usually like trying to get things perfect often gets them much worse than just like better is better, and just keep taking those steps to get better. And so that definitely hits me. Was there like a moment for you in improv, like a particular like moment that you can remember in a classes or in a show where it was like, ping, I'm in love?
What had me fall in love, especially in the beginning, like, because when you study at Second City, you don't get to do a show for 6 months. So the 6 months of just classes. And after, those are 3 levels, because every level is 2 months. And after every level, the class is like, are you going to continue? Or are we going to go through this together? And what really got me about improv was that like a bunch of adults, and I was doing a lot of coaching at the time, and like life coaching, and I just wanted people to do this more. And I didn't realize improv was a place where a bunch of adults put down their phones, stand up, and play for 3 hours. And like, there's no problem with that. And it's not, especially in short form, you don't get into a lot of negativity. Like maybe if you're doing an hour-long narrative show, there's more room for that. There's just not a lot of room for it. It's just a lot of games. And I was like, oh my God, people are getting up, they're playing, they're, enjoying games, they're putting down their electronics, they're leaving the news behind and all their problems behind for 3 hours. And I just watched all these people that I was in class with, like, one of the women was like losing her kids in the divorce, another guy was getting over a drinking problem, like, and they were kind of like working all of this stuff out in the room. And so way before I ever performed it, I was like, there is magic here. And then I felt like, for me, I just have something really cool or special about me is like, I'm really good at standardized tests, or like when the rubber hits the road, I'm good at it. If there's an emergency, like I walked out of the bar, like I passed the bar. It was not a question in my mind. And so then I started performing, and I was like, there's something about being on stage that I'm actually better. Like when it's the time, like it's even better. Levels up a little bit. And I just loved. It was like started just becoming what I wanted to do. I would go to jams. I would go, because like, what am I going to do? Sit around and day drink when I can get up and make up, cowboy songs about losing my shoes? Like this is fucking fantastic. And so it just became what I wanted to do. And then with Zoomprov, like the apocalypse hit sort of right as I was like, I'm going to get more physical and better about stage pictures and like all of these things that I couldn't do anymore. And so when I found No Pants, I was really in this phase of like, all right, I'm just going to, like you said, the character is really important. Like I'm going to really work on like the fundamentals of like what I'm supposed to be saying. And then I feel now like it's definitely improved, over the last few months. And so I don't know, improv just keeps, it has a whole different energy to it than a lot of the rest of the things, at least I do in life. And I really love that. And I find like the people that are drawn to improv, the one thing that they all have in common is that they're fucking awesome. And I want to talk to them all the time. And so
I like that improv tends to, I mean, not perfectly, but it does have a culling effect on complete assholes. Like if you can't play well with others and or people don't want to play with you, like eventually there's going to be some real problems for you in improv. So it's nice for that. I also appreciate just the I've got to do, like, I love this. Why would I do anything else? So there's Camp Improv Utopia, which is now multiple camps, like East Coast, West, Ireland. There's one, not in the Rockies, in the Grand Canyon, I believe. Anyway, there's these camps. And I remember I went to one of the first ones, and I've been a counselor there and taught at them. And I loved it. And already, like, you do a bunch of workshops, you're with improvisers all day, but still we had all this free time where there was also like, oh, you can go canoeing and play basketball or shoot archery or whatever. And I just kept thinking like, yeah, but I'm surrounded by improvisers from all of, we could be improvising. Why would we not? And so I eventually, like the second year I did it, approached Nick, the organizer, and was like, so I want to start I want to do more improv when we're not doing improv. And so I want to start an improv festival at the camp. So I created the Tiny Improv Festival, which took over what was normally like some of these break periods. So then became, people would submit like workshops or shows, but the shows were only like 10 minutes and the workshop was like 5 minutes. You had time to teach one exercise. Like a scaled down version of it. But it was just the same idea. Like, why would you not improvise when you can? And I agree. I definitely, when I talk about improv, I try to tone it down so it doesn't sound too cult-like, but I absolutely, I do applied improv for teaching folks to use it off the stage and benefit. And I fully drink and believe the Kool-Aid of it, that it's one of the best ways I know to learn this stuff. A lot of stuff, competent. I was teaching skills in grad school for folks who are becoming professional conflict resolvers, like mediators and facilitators and stuff. And I started poaching more and more improv exercises to use in the lab classes or skills classes. And ultimately it's the best way I know to teach this stuff and to learn this stuff. Even if you never put a label on what you're doing, that people still gain those skills from it.
Yeah, I was doing the same thing at coaching workshops. I was like, we can get to the same place with improv and it'll be way fun. Not that coaching is not fun, because I love that too. And what I love about you is that you took this other thing that you love, which is teaching, and you found a way to marry it with improv. And when you talk about it, you totally light up.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I just love teaching, period. As we're talking beforehand, I love the whole problem of, here's what someone knows, here's what they want to know. How do you make the best bridge across that? Like good pedagogy. I love that as a question. And it's often like, it's about empathy because you have to understand where they're at. It's about, there's a certain theatricality to it. Like, what's the good story to tell or the experience to create to help them learn from that. I love that as a thing. Pedagogy to me is one of the most fun and interesting and very human and dramatic questions. I love doing that. And so I used to love teaching, like, if the classes that people hated, like research methods and stuff, because if you can make those fun and engaging and exciting, that's so valuable. And improv is an incredibly tough thing to teach. Like, I've taught so graduate courses, undergraduate courses, usually in social science, but I also taught beforehand. I taught IT classes in the summer to teach them. And improv is so incredibly hard because the amount of stuff you have to learn from it, because you're learning to essentially how to write sketches, how to be an actor, how to do blocking, how to, like, all of this stuff. So there's that huge content area of knowledge and skills to cover. And then there's also, like, if you're teaching someone calculus or whatnot, then like, it's cognitively difficult, right? But they don't have, it's different than if you teach them improv, or when you're teaching someone to be a better mediator, for example. In those classes, it's not rocket science. Like, there's no concept in improv that's conceptually difficult, other than some of the concepts go against each other. So that's, but unlike calculus, you don't have to change who you are. But in improv and other things, you're often mucking around with stuff that's core to our identity and our deepest habits around times when we're in fear and uncertainty. And so that's some really tough stuff that can bring up for folks and to work with. So it's a tough thing to get folks to change and work with that. You're working with people around fear. I mean, we talk about play, but it's often in the face of fear and going on for doing that. So that's really challenging. Improv is hard because I maybe have one rule that I can teach in improv. Everything else, no. Like everything else is an it depends, which students hate.
What's the rule?
Okay. The rule is it's difficult. It's a necessary, but not necessary and sufficient condition for a good improv scene is you have to make an emotional choice in it. And the audience has to be able to see and know what that choice is. And so it's usually taught mad, sad, glad, afraid, but I think that's already too complicated for us. And so what I always teach is whenever you're uncertain or just anytime I've seen it stagnant or just, it's a good thing to do, make an emotional choice as your character, thumbs up or thumbs down. There's a million different versions of thumbs up. If it's like, you just gave me this mug, it can be, this mug is so precious and beautiful and I love it. Oh, it's shiny. And that's very different from the character of like, this is fucking awesome, man. Oh, hell yeah. It's trying to share the water without me even asking. It's fucking given. Like there's different versions of thumbs up. There's different versions of thumbs down. Like I hate it or I'm frightened of it. But just that simple thumbs up or thumbs down, getting more specific and justifying that comes easy. It's the fear of making the wrong choice that goes in the way. So just getting people to go thumbs up or thumbs down. You say like, if I was sent from a terrorist group to ruin an improv show, the quickest way I would know to do it in scenes is to just, whenever you say something to me as your scene partner, not care, like just not give an emotional choice, like whatever, it's unimportant. Or to just, if I sometimes like stuff and don't, if it's wavering, then you never have a read on what to give me as a scene partner. The audience doesn't know if it's going well for my character or not in the scene. They don't know whether or not they want to root for me. And if they were rooting for me, they don't know whether or not it's going well for me. Like everything fails. So the one thing I really push to folks is like, you need to make emotional choices. The rest will follow. And so remembering that everything else, like don't ask questions. It's hogwash. There's great questions to ask in scenes. Don't say no. It's a straight man in the scene or playing the voice of reason. Me pushing back about what you're doing being wrong is part of the fun, right? So I don't want to say no and stop it, but it's sort of like cranking the brakes on the freight train to make the cool sparks fly. I'm not trying to make the train stop, but I do want to push back because that conflict, it's weird to imagine scenes without conflict because conflict is what makes stuff fun. It's really about how do you keep moving. And so just about every improv rule that I know that I hear, I'm like, no, we can definitely break that and do amazing scenes, that those are training wheels to try to change your habits. But that's the one that I have.
Yeah. So,
and the on stuff to teach, the other part of it is that there's no rules, is that what works for folks varies. So there's stuff that may work for someone as their process that doesn't work for me. So there's that. And to even add more to that, and then what we're trying to accomplish varies. Like, are we trying to make an artistic play? Are we trying to do theater? Are we trying to do sketch on the fly? Like the goals vary. And then even just individually, it's not just there's no one recipe that works for every person. There's no one recipe that works for a person throughout their improv life. So there's stuff I did that worked really well for me. And then at some point, like, nope, I had to fundamentally change things for me, and like sort of how I think about scenes and what I focus on to work, which is incredibly frustrating / an awesome challenge. But it means it's very, hopefully improv teachers eventually learn the humility. You'll get folks who are like, oh my God, this was amazing. This was perfect. But other people it wasn't from. And it's just that you happen to hit them right at their path and journey, whereas what they needed to go. It's like sort of going like, I'm an awesome key. It's like, no, it fits locks at different times. And so it's kind of very humbling for that. So I love that it's on Olympic diving difficulty of stuff to teach. It's really hard to teach well. And I love that. It makes it a great challenge.
Oh yeah. I'm like a parent's worst nightmare now, because a lot of parents control their kids through fear and like teaching them what a mistake is. And I get that they're like developmental ages where like these things are important, but I'm just like, I hang out with my friend and her 5-year-old and 6-year-old, and they're having a conversation about mistakes, and I'm like running around, there are no mistakes, like that's, you want to do a good improv one day, don't listen. But what I want to like give to you these things that I've been thinking about lately for your thoughts, because like you mentioned that letting go of control and being present and like dealing with the fear of that is one of the hardest things to teach. And I've been thinking about how like now I've sort of been able to more and more like do it and see other people doing it, like wearing my emotions on my sleeve in the scene and then calling things out, like that makes me feel this. Or you and I did a scene in the recent short form show where you're like, are you trying to establish dominance over me? And like I had no idea until you said that, but like yeah, I totally was, like that was what my character was doing. And it's such a brilliant moment to call that out, and it makes such a better scene to like show the emotion that the character is feeling. And I really think that there's something about learning to do that that is so related to like breaking through the fear that is also like bleeding through in the rest of my life.
Oh, so that you hit the emotion and the rest just kind of flows after that to note that, or
like I've just trained myself now. Like, I mean, I was always sort of word vomity and like, you're going to get what is on my mind. So that, I guess gave me a leg up, but like, I'll just say the most vulnerable things. And then like things that when I was like in my 20s or teens would have kept me up at night for a week and a half, and I'll have this like, oh, I don't know if I should have like, but then I'm like, okay, great. Like that's, because I'm just immersed in this practice of like, thank you for saying that, because I felt really vulnerable about it because this and this and this weird thing about me. And now that you've said it, I feel this way. And like, I'll go home and I'll be like, why did I just say all that? But also like, I said all of that because that's what I'm practicing it in life. That's who I'm being,
I remember like 4 years in improv or so, I had this moment where I was just talking with a friend it was at a coffee shop. And then I was like, this feels like a good improv scene. I'm like, what if it was an improv? Like if I thought of this as an improv scene, what would I be doing differently? And that, yeah. And then that definitely plays more with the, like, say the thing you're thinking. And yeah. And it definitely has pulled out that moments of being vulnerable have worked out really well. As a result. Yeah.
I just feel like I've trained myself, like run head first into the emotional word vomit and it's going to be great. And now I do it all the time. Yeah.
I think I definitely got more comfortable like starting what I'm going to say before I know where it's going to go, and then just trust like it's going to work out for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, and yeah, just less of I mean, I was never much into preparation of things. I was always like, let's wing it. And so, but like even less of that now. Just like, why would I need to know anything for this to be fabulous? I don't need to know anything. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. You were telling me like that there were a couple things that you really think are important to teach.
Oh, yeah, well, the stuff that like every improv teacher like will cover. Like I feel like in any given improv class you take, if it's not a workshop, if it's like a level 1 through 5 or whatever, long form, like 75% or whatever, I love making up numbers for stuff, is like stuff you might get from anyone who's teaching it and doing a competent job and who is good at it. Like these are common things. And then the fun 25% is like, what's unique about this instructor that if it was taught by someone else would be different, like that either their approach to improv or the things that they really focus on, or like, here's what I think is really important. Like, here's the thing. And for me, the two things that are often like, that I often sort of am distinguished for, anyone who's taken a class from me, like, oh, taking a class from John, I bet you did this. One is this idea of this emotional choice, thumbs up or thumbs down, make it, which I think a lot of folks do. And I think I think it's growing the amount I see emotional point of view follow as a character deal. And going from that, I see that as becoming more and more common. So at this point, I think for me, it's just the clarity of thumbs up or thumbs down as a way to think about it, which for some folks ends up being really helpful, I think, because they don't, this idea of make a choice, mad, sad, angry, afraid, I know very few improvisers, certainly not myself, and from talking to others, who in the middle of a scene would think like, am I angry? Am I happy? Am I sad?
There's a
Whereas
disconnect that happens there if you have to go through that thought process. Yeah.
Right. Whereas like thumbs up or thumbs down, that's a much more gut fast thing. And then the specifics follow from that. So that thumbs up or thumbs down and commit to it. And then the other is for it, the idea of it's better to discover in an improv scene than create generally, because for one thing, it's if we're creating, we're trying to do on the fly what people can do with experience all the time. If I discover, then odds are I'm discovering with my scene partner and the audience at the same time. So now we're sharing in a moment in a way that only can happen in that live experience with the audience that can't be replicated on TV in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's better to discover than create, but we do sometimes want to create. But in between, I like remembering using stuff from our own lives. And so it's this idea that specifics help scenes, particularly like use proper nouns. Like we're not anywhere. We're at Maitland Junior High. We're in Lake Apopka that we're at right now. We've got an Evinrude on the back of the Bass Pro boat here. My Toyota Hyundai, I don't think that is, I just combined two things, is out there. But to try to use specifics. But when people make specifics, they often try to invent them. And sometimes like you can make some very clever names or whatnot. But I really find that when you use things you know from your own life, you get specifics that have the sort of stink of truth. They just feel better and they feel less contrived. They often, when I see people make up specifics, it's like I'm watching two people improvise. But when they're using facts from their own lives, it feels real. Mm-hmm. Plus, I have all this emotional connection to it. Like if I remember my first car the first new car I ever owned when I graduated college was a Saturn SL2. And I remember it was gold. And I sort of know everything about the car. I have feelings about the car. And so I get all of these specifics for it. If I'm doing object work, I know where everything is in the car. It means that if
I'm in that scene with you, like my character has feelings about what's happening in this gold Saturn that they might be having different feelings about in a Bentley or whatever. Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, it's just really mundane stuff. Like if I'm in a kitchen, I'll be in a kitchen that I know, because then I know where everything is, right? And what's more, if I open the fridge, I know where stuff is. So it clarifies, I'm able to make very specific physical choices on object work. But at the same time, I get all this emotional stuff. So it's also, I often will endow scene partners after people that I know. Typically earlier in my life, not improv folks, because the improvisers recognize the other improvisers, but I have all the stuff in the back pocket from that. So if I endow my scene partner, I might call them Dylan Vance, who was my college roommate I had. And we lived in a house that it was definitely pink, but he kept maintaining it was Dusty Rose, but it was totally pink. And I don't know why he had such an issue with admitting that. And so, but like I have these details like that I can then pull off of stuff. And so I don't have to endow them with all those specifics, but I often do. And then I can get deeper. Like, oh, here's the thing I always wanted to tell Dylan, but I never did. Or here's something that I know about Dylan that he doesn't know that I know about him. So I have these juicy details I can pull in the middle of a scene that are a little bit better than like, I've got a gun, or like, I know you were once abducted by aliens in Missouri. Like,
yeah, I want to know what both of those things are. And there's so much more want to see your thoughts than like aliens in Missouri.
Right. But like the aliens in Missouri is so less interesting. And it just feels so different from like, he said it's Dusty Rose, but that house was clearly pink, which like, that's real. Like that's actually in hearing an improv show. I actually want to hear that Dusty Rose argument way more than I want like, oh, great, aliens, there's probably going to be butt probing. Like, great. I'm watching people do improv as opposed to like, this feels interesting and powerful. And it definitely, by people using those specifics from their own life, you get to work through a bunch of stuff. Like you can also admit your own secrets, but they don't know you're as a character. Like there's great stuff to go. But that often you have these moments. My favorite moments in improv is when you get these laughs and you don't expect them. Like you were just saying something that was obvious and true to you. And it gets these great reactions. You realize this thing you thought was weird was actually a very shared human experience, like the best of comedy. And so I find that when they talk about truth and comedy, to actually use it in a very literal way, to try to use as many details from your own life and from stories you know of others in your life in it. I find that ends up being really useful. I don't, thumbs up and thumbs down has a really high track record of success for folks. They're remembering your own life. For some folks, it just puts them too much in their head. Like trying to remember details isn't stuff that they can do easily. There's so much, like I'm just trying to remember what's going on in the scene. And now you're trying to remember like this whole other thing. So I think it helps for people who've been doing improv a little bit longer. So you're a little bit less in your head in your own scenes. But when I see it work, it's really wonderful.
Yeah, I know for me, like studying improv and acting was like it was almost like somebody had a bunch of little blocks and it was like, here, hold these 3 and do a scene holding these 3. And then it was like, here are your notes. Now do another scene. And you just keep like, and the amount of blocks that you can manage and create a cool scene just become more and more and more. And I can see where like, there are levels where that block is going to tumble down this whole thing I'm trying to carry, you know, and other levels where people are that it's like, all right, that's what I'm going to do now. Yeah.
I think we should probably do more of that as teachers. I think because we were talking beforehand about like, why do people do improv? Some people are like, I just want to be fun. Like this is a bowling league. Like these folks are bowlers, which is great. Like but they're there to have fun. It's not like this is an art form. I dearly love comedy, and that's fine. I love that there are people who have never got on stage who will get on stage as a result and expand who they are and discover more. Yay. And this art form. But being able to play more with it, to do it. Where was I going with that more? Nope.
Blocks?
Pardon?
Blocks?
Blocks, right? Yeah. So in level 1 for fun, we do different stuff every class, right? But in most stuff, I think what we really need, the difference between me, if I'm a good improviser, and I've been doing this for like 16 years or whatever, then I think the difference between me and a beginner is more habit-based. Like I've just developed better habits. Like that's a big part of it. And usually to develop habits, you need to repeat stuff and work on it over and over. So the idea of like, here's just this one thing I want you to remember, and you just focus on that for a while, gets you out of your head, and eventually it becomes instinct, and then you get to put it down, and now you don't have to wrestle with it as a block. But I want to do a book that's just here. I want to call it, here's the thing, as if there's just one thing, which there isn't. But like often before shows, I think we often like, here's just one thing I want you to work on during this show, this performance. And sometimes it's like a specific thing, like always make up or down emotional choices, like never be vague. Or I call it stage battleship, where I want you like step foot on every part of the stage before the show is over. Like, here's this one thing and you do that enough, and then you just start eventually being more physical and having more movement on stage. That just gets internalized. You don't have to work on it. But I think rather than instead of we do this whirlwind of stuff, that really what's more important for individuals is to like pick this one thing that they work on until it no longer distracts them because it's gotten boring.
Yeah.
And easy.
I do that for myself. That's what I was saying about like Zoom prov versus like, yeah, totally. But I love having other people to give me things because I don't know, you know, what is, yeah. And I feel like sometimes you get off stage, or at least for me, like, and people are like, that was great. And I'm like, I don't know, I blacked, like fog of war. I was in the moment. You tell me, I don't know if you're telling me because you like me and you came here to see my show, or, you know, what. And then other times you walk off and you're like, that was amazing. And then sometimes, at least for me, I walk off and I'm like, that doesn't feel so good, but other people maybe loved it or didn't, you know? And I wasn't really going anywhere in particular with this, but I find that like, for the most part, like it also helps with fog of war, because it's like I'm in the fog of war. I gotta trust that I know what I'm doing right now, and maybe the one thing that I'm doing is like I'm gonna be holding things and moving things and objecting things the whole time, and trust, you know, like trust that everything else can function on autopilot.
And then you find that the autopilot often does really good work on it. Like that, part of it is that because I feel like holding that one block, it's doing double duty. One, you're building that habit, and two, it's getting you out of your own way for the rest, which is if the neurobiology on improv is kind of interesting. So put folks in improvisers in active fMRI machines. And they did that both with folks who did stage improv, and WIT actually provided, Washington Improv Theater did some of the human subjects for it. And they did the same with jazz musicians for also improvised, and put and also amateurs in. And were curious, like while improvising, do experienced improvisers, are they using their brain differently? And they are, whether or not they're doing jazz or doing comedy on the stage, they tamp down their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain most associated with self-judgment. So this like, is this going well or not? Tamping it down. So I think that might be this idea of concentrating on this one thing so I can't judge myself is sort of at the neurological level, and that's really getting at what we're going for.
Yeah. And then I don't know about you, but the trick for me in like learning improv was also learning to like tamp that down afterwards. And I feel like helps with sort of the spirit of improv in the rest of my life, is like I can do something in the moment and like I've been using the phrase word vomit here, but I could just like, say things and do things. I'm very good at that. But then other times afterwards, I'd be like, oh my God. But then now I'm just like, I like to describe, I know before Zoom Prov was a thing, like my family who didn't live in Chicago would be like, can we watch? How do we see this? Blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, it's a Buddhist sand painting. It just disappears. And sort of giving myself like that permission in all of life with whatever comes out of my mouth. It's like, I did my best and then the wind blew it away.
It's funny because improv is about letting go of control, right? I think a lot of people would say like, yes, it's about letting go of control. But the act of beating yourself up after a show seems as if you're then acting from a place that you think you have a lot of control, right? Mm-hmm. That there's so much in it that is not in our control in the moment of that. So I think for me, that was a bit of, because I certainly would beat myself up after shows. And it was like, people get angry at that. And I'll say like, everyone I know who stuck with improv and got really good at it definitely beat themselves up at times for it. But the, I have a good story about that too. Actually, I'll tell the story, and then because it's both I had the story and the epiphany. So the last time I really beat myself up terribly about a show, I still every now and then will have moments of like, but like really like spending 4 times as long beating myself up as the show was in length. Mm-hmm. Right? Like some of I was it was called the Dirty South Improv Festival, and then it became the North Carolina Improv. It's changed over time, and then it rightfully got canceled. But at the time, it was the Dirty South Improv Festival. I was part of the festival. You took workshops as well, and I did that. I was coming out of a workshop. One of the troupe mates of the time, who's a Chicago improviser now, Maggie Dempsey, threw a water bottle for me to catch, but I wasn't expecting it. It was like, John, catch. And I turn, and because of my lazy eye, I don't have depth perception. So catching stuff out of the air is not something I'm good at. So I caught it with my tooth and chipped off like half of a front tooth from this. So like, and so immediately went and had to go get emergency dental surgery. Like that surgery seems a bit strong, but like that before the show that night, I hate the dentist. Like this was terrible. I was a mess. I was drugged out. Get to the show. So already I'm in a bad place. We go in, the place is packed, which is great. The troupe before us ends their set. Everyone then proceeds to get up just about and empty out of the theater, because it turned out they'd shifted to one of the headliners being at the exact same time at the theater next door. So like, but still, when you're going up through a mat, trying to get to the stage, and it's difficult because there's throngs of people leaving, that's a tough way to start the show. We asked for a suggestion, and the suggestion is prostitute, which was yelled at by someone by another improviser, which was just even more like, hey, I would have taken pineapple, like anything for that. And then we proceed to do a terrible show, like the kind of show where in the middle of it, you go like, this is going badly. And then I remember at one point, I even pushed over a chair kind of hard. And I hate that. Like, don't abuse chairs. Like that's one of the like fastest ways, like anyone who's an artistic director will look at you like, you don't know how much bentwood chairs cost. Like that is, be kind to the person. Right, there you go.
Signs all over backstage in Second City. They're $125.
There you go. Well done, Second City. I feel like we should do the same everywhere. Because once you get on the other side of like running a theater, then you're like, and so I remember pushing over like, and I remember thinking like, what is wrong with me? Like I've turned into a monster. This is terrible. And I went out afterwards, and I was staying at the Loft in the hotel there, and I bought a bottle of wine, and I just drank it. And I don't remember much of it, but I remember that I didn't want to go to bed with that being the last improv I did. And so I did hand puppet improv. And I know that at some point it was at Herald, because I remember at one point diving off the bed or diving under the bed with my hands and feet in the air, yelling group scene for this. And then getting my next door neighbor to complain, to get the hotel that apparently I was doing a loud improv show in my hotel room. And then the next morning, as I was coming from the hangover of remembering that, I had this sort of weird epiphany of like, it's weird that I teach people like let go of control of this. And yet I'm sitting here, there was so much that was out of my control and always out of control then. It's a weird, like beating yourself up is also weirdly, wrongly assuming you have more control and you're more important than you are in the moment.
Also just assuming that they're all supposed to go great, like Who's not like any stand-up comedian bombs on any given night, even, like everybody bombs.
Yeah. And I also feel like if you told me at this point, you could tell me like, hey, John, do a good show. Like if I'm doing a Torco kind of thing. So this is a corporate gig. Like there, I have the like, there it's a leave no scene behind. We don't want a flop scene. And it's playing it in a different way. That sort of like, if you tell me to play consistently good scenes, like I can do that. But that's also going to kind of get in the way of brilliant scenes. So there is sort of letting go of that safety net to sort of surprise yourself and do brilliant work that risks having bombed. So at some point, if I haven't had any bad shows, at some point it's like, that probably means I haven't had any really fucking great shows.
Yeah.
And so
sometimes the good is the enemy of the brilliant. You have to take those risks.
that is a good callback. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes like, or not all the time by any means, but like oftentimes that is like what ensemble is for, is like for me to not only be comfortable taking the risks, but then for us to as a group be able to do something with those risks that turns it into brilliance. Right? Like that's why I think so much emphasis is put on the connection of the human.
I have a weird, that's like things that are also interesting when people have contrarian views on that. So I have a contrarian view about ensemble, but I know that I always tell people like, big caveat, this is like, I try to be clear of like when I have very contrarian views. So I always might be wrong, everything, but this extra might be wrong. I think that the emphasis played on ensemble work it's overdone a little bit. I think part of it is there's a lot of improv that's 20 something that is doing this as a social outlet. And so we want to do all the things together. And that's wonderful. Like I love the friend troops I've been in that like it's in the bonding, like, yeah. But on the other hand, now that I'm teaching often at festivals and like I get in teacher shows, I'll do in shows with people that I've never performed with whatsoever. And we'll do really good work because they're good improvisers. And so a lot of time when people do the argument about like, no, it's so important to have ensemble and trust work, I'm like, okay, what are all the things that you do then that are different? And they describe that. And like, I'm going to do that with everybody. Like, I think that that's the thing to do. But I think also like, that's also a point of privilege, right? Like I haven't gotten burned really badly doing that. And I can imagine where if I had, that would make me more frightened. But if you can put me in the middle of a jam with all new people, which I love doing, and I still feel like I should improvise with them like I would with the advanced folks, like just trust them. And that it mostly has worked. I almost got my ribs cracked once by a beginning improviser trying to do improv CPR like CPR. But that's my only exception for it. But I'm also a white dude. So I end up in less scenes where people are trying to, rape my character or to make my character fit a cultural stereotype or stuff like that. So I have it's easier from that place, perhaps for that idea of like, shouldn't we always trust our partners?
Yeah. Well, I think what came up for me when you were saying that story was like, I wonder if your practice after so many years of bringing an ensemble like spirit, is what's important in building ensemble. Maybe it's not like, maybe for beginners, it's like you focus on the humans, the specific humans, because you're in an ensemble, but like, really, I think it's an ensemble spirit. And I think like, even if you've never met those people before, it sounds like you always bring the ensemble spirit and can create the magic that comes out of trusting good or not so good improvisers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm usually thinking on the ensemble. I'm usually thinking at the system level, which is I'm just wired. I'm inclined that way. Less than I'm like, ooh, this is my character. It's all about pouring it into this one character, but also what would really benefit the scene. Trying to do gifts that give great playgrounds or toys for other characters. I love doing that. And so, yeah, that's part of just that orientation towards it.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this lately. Like, have you seen, as someone who teaches and does all this stuff, have you seen a lot of like growth and development across No Pants in the last few months as a team and an ensemble of people who are learning virtual improv and doing it at the same time and meeting each other and bridging international boundaries? Do you think that there's been like growth amongst the team, or it's just all around cool?
I've been trying to figure it out. Like for one thing, there are a lot of No Pants folks who had less experience in improv than I thought, like would have guessed on it like that. So like folks have really like out of the gate been doing, I feel really strong work for that. I think we've been this whole, like, because we're changing formats all the time, we're now getting more comfortable with things we've learned from one format applying to another. So I think we're able to do faster shorthand with each other for playing with formats on that. I think we're doing better about playing with rather than at each other. So there's more, like, instead of just I'm doing my character and you're doing your character, and maybe they fit in interesting ways or maybe they don't, but we're both so up our own characters' butts, we don't notice what's going on in the scene for it. And I feel like now there's more reacting. And so that's, I think that's going. So that's part. And I think also just playing with production value with like costumes, I think are great on Zoom. And there's been more leaning towards that. And coming up with innovative ways to figure out what formats work on Zoom. I think a lot of there. Yeah. But there's been no improviser in the group where I've been going like, oh, can you please stop doing this? And like, oh, look, they've stopped doing that. Like that hasn't been, I haven't had that issues with anyone.
Yeah, no, I feel like we've really, I've been feeling lately like we've really developed, and like I've really developed. So I don't know how enmeshed those two concepts are. But I just was wondering if you had some. I think that's cool. Yeah. What else? What haven't I asked? What else do you want to tell us? What do you want to ask me? I don't know.
Yeah. What's your favorite? When you think about like, hey, this is the teacher in me, because it's always interesting. Like, hey, what's an exercise that you did that was like, oh, like a light went on, or like, oh, either a light went on, or like, oh, this really stretches the muscle so perfectly for the thing that I'm trying to stretch.
Well, I was telling you about one I did yesterday where we used, like each person in the scene had a question from that New York Times article about like 37 questions to ask on dates if you want to fall in love. And we were supposed to answer just that question as our actual selves and not the character whenever it felt like that was the question we were getting, which sort of presented this like period of time where you were just getting really real because you weren't sure you were being like exactly what it was, you know, because people were rephrasing the questions into fit. Like still same question, but different wording. And I hadn't like read the article in 5 years or whatever. And I like it when I do something different and I feel the magic of that. Like I really felt like, there, like, you know, you mentioned people can smell something, and I feel like there's the audience are like sharks. Like it's not that they can sense fear, but they can sense like realism. Like this is a real character. Like we're creating together. Like there's something real happening here. And so I felt like that really happened where I was giving these answers, and I didn't even need to necessarily give them as myself, Nicole, like Perkowitz in real life, but I did. But like to feel that there was something special happening in that scene, you know? And the same thing happened in conservatory where we did like probably a class and a half on just the fact that everyone has opinions on everything. And so your character will have like, and I felt the difference of like, oh, this is like Nicole human. These are all the opinions I have on all the things. And then like my characters will have so much. So just I'm really loving things that I like feel the realism and depth of what that's creating. And a lot of time that involves like bringing Nicole to the scene, but then I can take that energy and that concept and like plug it in wherever.
Fair enough. Nice. Yeah, there is something. It continues to kind of spook me out the way to which the audiences can sniff out truth, and they can sniff out if it's like legitimately discovered and versus invented. Like there, it's a little unnerving to me actually. So yeah. But
I believe that a lot of communication is nonverbal and even non-necessarily body language. There's like a lot of communication and energy.
Right.
And you know, and one of the things I've learned a lot through like coaching and teaching is like, you can't really teach anybody anything. You can like model it for them and show it to them, and they gotta like get it and absorb it. And there's something about like feeling the energy in the way that I'm being taught this thing of the scene and being like, that was different. And that's what they're sniffing out. And that's what I want to bring. And one of the reasons that I started studying acting in addition to improv was like, I wanted to know how to move that energy around.
Yeah. And I think often like it's up to teach, like there's this nebulous thing where I'm talking about the energy, but that we also learn from teachers. Like Susan Messing has a very different energy about it than let's say Jill Bernard, but I've learned like from both there. And that there's also that just sort of like, if there's the emotional point of view or the disposition of the teacher towards improv, like I definitely have a very mischievous thing. Like my favorite, the jackalope is my favorite of the animals, that kind of the trickster. Like I definitely like the, like, oh, the scene's super broken. Like, this is fun. Like that's, I think that if students get something from me, like that's my vibe towards improv, but that we learn from everyone's, that sort of goes and sort of gets added to our own stew for it, but that's another big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it's awesome to take classes from different people over time, because you just get different things.
I've not understood when people are like, oh, I just want to take this person over and over. Like, oh, like that's not the right go.
No, I mean, I want to do everything Liz Allen does. I definitely love her. And I want to take classes from a bunch of.
Right. I've definitely had instructors that I've been like that for. Yeah. I also wish that, and people should keep taking classes. Like that's the other thing I don't always get. Like, so, I feel like I get to be like B-list improv celebrity. So like I get to teach at festivals and whatnot, but not like, I'm not a headliner on anything that, for that, sometimes headliner true, but usually like I get to, teach it. But I still will take workshops like all the darn time for it. And I know a couple of other, there's, I'd say about like half of the people I know who teach at festivals will still also take workshops because we love doing it. And then other folks I know who do, like, who won't take a workshop at all. It almost is like, no, I'm on this status now. And I just don't get it. Like, I love getting a chance to be a student when I'm teaching, because like, I can always learn something new, and that's great. Or even if it's something that I know already, like, oh, that's a great other way to teach it or to cover it or things like that. So yeah.
You and I are gluttons for improv.
Yeah. I love that. I don't know if it's still that way, but my bio on the website always used to begin with like, John Wimiller loves improv, loves it. Like that's, yeah, I got voted DC's biggest improv nerd. I think it's amazing. Yeah.
I love that. Like, I know, I mean, in all honesty, like 5 things about you probably, but I could sit here and talk to you about improv all day.
Yeah. That's on things that I miss from the before times, the going out to the bar to nerd out about improv afterwards. Yeah.
Maybe we should have, after one of our shows, like everybody make themselves a cocktail and we'll nerd out about it. I like it. Yeah. I think that'd be fun. Yeah. Because there's been all kinds of ways in which No Pants I've been interesting to see the shift, because there's definitely like a heavy hideout component, which is narrative oriented, super genre focused, like on what they're paying attention is often in genre, which very rarely was something that, I mean, every now and then I would play to a scene like, oh, this feels like it has a film noir feel or whatever, like, or North, but there, and also dig into typically longer scenes. Like you could just feel like, what does this scene start feeling long to them, versus like East Coast improv. I feel like there a 10-minute scene is more common, versus East Coast, like 3 or 4 minute scene is pretty common. And so giving those different sense of timing and whatnot, that I'd love to see, like if other folks also notice like this weird convergence or how that's going. I think so. I mean, I had only done Second City. I had started signing up for classes at Annoyance and IO right when this hit. So I took literally one, not one whole class, like one day of class at each. And I had never done a mono scene. Like I had done 1 hour long show. And I think we did 10 games, and like also I hosted different games, and some of them were line games or everybody games, and so like you might be backstage for a minute, but you're just running back and forth, like, what's the new thing I'm doing? What's the, and maybe there's a callback to another game, but you're always like, I gotta be fresh. Like, this is Foursquare, this is new, this is Onion Peel, this is new. And so the first time, like No Pants, we signed up for our shows and it was a mono scene. I was like, I'm just too intimidated to do it. And then I pitched one to direct for some reason. I didn't. So, and that ended up being like 6 people on camera the whole time because I didn't really have the background. I was like, I'm just gonna, and now, because everybody brings different styles and everybody directs and pitches different shows and decides how to do them, I've just like learned and absorbed so much, and I feel like I can jump into different things. And now I'm just like, yeah, let's do this for 3 hours. I can do this for 3. Yeah.
And I love doing different styles. One of my favorite things, I remember I did a workshop in Chicago where I went straight from one of the original UCB4 people teaching a workshop, and then one of the IO, actually 2, I did Jimmy Coran was one, and Susan Messing was the other. And I don't think it was Besser. I don't know why I'm spacing out. But so I went back and forth between like play UCB style by the book, then play IO style. And I I was really happy that I could do both. But what's more, I loved that. Like I loved, rather than just like, oh, we're going to do improv, it was really fun to play in very different styles.
Yeah.
And so I've really loved getting to switch that up. Yeah.
I was on a high for several days after our last short form show because I just hadn't done short form since our one short form show I had a lisp as a kid, so that was a little hard, in June. And I was like, oh, that was so, like, I just forgot how much fun, but now doing all short form feels like it's missing something else. Like I gotta do all of that, Yeah.
Yep. I pitched a show for this next month. It's just like, we're gonna just do scenes, like fast paced, open scenes, lots of callbacks. Scenes will probably be 3 minutes is a long scene, have fun, go. Because I realized like I've oddly missed that, even though I think too much improv is that, like without effort at theming it, because that's very hard to market. Yeah, we make it all up and it's funny. It's very fun to do. It's hard to market, and it sometimes gets really sloppy, but it's also a lot of fun. And I found that I was missing that. So if I do any one kind, I get that way. In Baltimore, I was for many years with a group that did something called Unscripted, which was about an hour and a half or a little over an hour long 2-act play. There was a dramatic play. It was not, there was comedy, but it really wasn't like, we're not trying to be funny. It was really, the goal is to be a compelling play. Where we also had sets and wardrobe that were improvised. So we had a whole bunch of different set pieces and a whole bunch of wardrobe. So Tex, if you said like, reporting to duty, sir, someone would run out and we had military uniforms that they might put on you in the middle of your scene and doing that. And so it was this really ambitious, high concept thing that gave these great dramatic plays and wonderful. And I loved doing it. But by the end, I was itching for I want to do fast, short, goofy stuff, and vice versa. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I've kept you and our audience for an hour. Any parting words of wisdom or thoughts to share?
I've always liked I go back to the Messing quote that if you're not having fun, you're the asshole, as a thing, which, I mean, there are times when it's like things are really cruddy. So it's not that like you're a jerk for not being able to realize that. But I really liked, at least for improv, this idea of if you're not having fun, you totally have the power to like fix that. Like it's good for you. It's good for the audience. There's 2 damning notes I've ever received. Like, why the hell did you put yourself in this scene? Like that, which is like, yep. Like that. And the other one, that was a less, like, it's very helpful. Like I very much appreciate that. Like, why don't you put, like, if you love being in a submarine, initiate scenes in submarines, like have fun with it. Like, this character, follow your bliss. And then the other was Jet Evelith, where in the middle of a scene, she paused and she's just the most lovable, wonderful person and said it with the kindest heart, which was, she said in the middle of it, I'm sorry, but I don't fucking believe you. Which was this nice thing about commitment. Like, yeah, so now it's sort of simplified improv instead of like how to get funny to like, oh man, just get to like know what's happening and where are we? The order of operation for the audience is what's going on. Do I believe it? Do I care? And improv got a lot simpler for me when that's when I focused on, rather than like, oh, be funny. That's a pretty high order thing to reach, but to just like, when you point out like, oh, just say what you think, like just my goal is to make it clear and believable and compelling. And that feels more doable for me. And I have a lot more fun on that. So those are my like going away stuff.
I love that.
Yeah. And if for folks who haven't tried Zoom improv, try it. Even if you're watching Zoom improv and going like, I don't know about this, the doing of it is a lot. It works. So yeah.
Yeah. It helps you, I think, build different skills and muscles that will then translate in different ways when you go back into a theater, it's cool weights to lift.
What about you? What's your going away, or like you're going into, when's your next show?
So I don't think we're having a show on Sunday.
Right.
And then I think I'm directing the show on Wednesday, or like I'm directing one of the first couple of shows in August. It might be, or in October.
Right.
My brain, which is Pet Psychic.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything? So it's Pet Psychic, and now is there something in improv that you're like, ooh, here's the one thing that like, any blocks that you're really fond of at the moment, or that you're?
I'm really fond of playing inanimate objects at the moment. I have such a boner for like, what I have a non-boner for is Zoom prov that looks like this. where I feel like I'm watching a meeting of people talking to each other. Like I want to use the space, I want to use the lighting, you know, like I don't want it to look anything like these no pants hair interviews.
Mm-hmm.
I like, you know, filters and outfits, but I think all of that's ancillary. I think lately it's like the subtext of what is happening, like calling out the subtext of what feels like it's happening in the scene and let everybody deal with that. Feels like it creates something really beautiful and something that is discovered.
I feel like that's often, I don't know if Second City uses this language. We often use the term like activate the scene. Like the scene was going, it's not that it was broken until then. So activate has been like, you sort of, like this scene just got real, like there. And it's not like the scene was failing beforehand, because setting that up, like you, if beat one is like, if you get a laugh on your first line, that's going to be a hard scene.
Yeah.
Right. So, but that moment, like, oh, now we know what the scene is about.
Yeah.
Like that.
I'm in the scenes like this. Like, where is that thing of that I want to lean into? Because it's there somewhere. And I took a character workshop with Norm Holly, and I missed the first 2 classes because I was signed up for no pants shows. Mm-hmm. But what I got out of the second 2 of 4 classes were that like they were all sort of like create subtext. And so like, and then I found, and I think it's the reason why I keep using your example of like, are you trying to establish dominance over me? It's like, there's a subtext here. And if we can find it and work with it, there's something really interesting there. And so I'm really into that lately.
I really like the idea of, people think of agreement as agreement being like, I say we're in New Jersey, so you agree, yes, we're in New Jersey. And like, so agree with that. I like, I feel like there's got so much baggage around the game of the scene, which I think is UCB's own fault in part. But this idea of, if you're doing comedic improv, agreeing on what the fun thing is, like, or dramatic, like this is the core of the scene. Like, so it's like the scene's about something, it should have some focus to it. And so to me, the most important thing is reaching agreement between you and me of like, yes, like this is the thing we're playing with right now, which is when we were talking beforehand about swing dancing, when it feels like you're dancing with someone, not just you're dancing and I'm dancing and we hope it fits together, but now like, yeah, this is a thing we're heightening and playing with together. Like that kind of agreement is my favorite. And so, yeah, that naming it is a cool way to.
Like just pointing to the meat of the truth. And I remember like being in level E at Second City, and I would do this thing where it was like, I have ADHD too, and my brain is just like, shh. And so like I would call out like kind of associations. So I would take a scene that was doing this and like make it do this and then make it do, and like I realized that like, first of all, not everyone's brain works on my speed or like with my, you know, associations, right. But also like the audience is watching this, or like we're doing this, and like there's way more here than just like that reminds me of that, reminds me of that, and like now we're playing separately but together, you know, versus like what is this?
Yeah, together, the idea about being connected, the most, I think, profound workshop I had was on that, sorry, was Jeff Mikowski, who used to be at Second City. I think now he's in New York. He doesn't do workshops that much anymore, but we did a game where there were just 2 of us. We weren't speaking, but anytime you would move, I would move in some way also. So essentially like we're connected. And it might be that I decide I'm going to follow what you do with your head. And anytime you do with your head, I might change what I'm doing with my body or something like that, right? So I just link some part of me to, and I might, if Jeff is watching, like I might be getting this wrong, but it's roughly that. So all we were doing was that. And then beforehand, he told them, these are 2 friends at a gazebo or whatever, but he didn't tell them what we were doing. So it was a silent scene, and the audience had loved the scenes, and they told these compelling stories where it was just because everything I did was a reaction to what you did, and everything that you did was a reaction to what I did. And the words were not that consequential, but yeah. And usually that link is, instead of being physical, it's about the thing the scene's about. Like that's the rope we're both holding. So when you tug, it pulls me and vice versa.
That's so cool.
Cool. This time has flown. I know we were just talking like 15 and it went long, but I
know. Well, thanks for sticking with us, Twitterverse. I mean, Twitchverse. I don't even Twitter.
Maybe Twitter is getting in there too. Just
maybe, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe someone's live tweeting the highlights of this interview. That'd be awesome. I'm gonna let Twitch go now. So bye everybody.
Bye everybody.
Watching.